I live in the basement of a 2-story house. My brother and I rent. He has the upper floor, and my girlfriend and I live on the lower floor. He's entertaining a lady friend this evening, and I'm in my room trying not to hack up a lung. I have that flu going around, so I've been curled up under my comforter, sleeping on and off and watching Netflix. Around 8, it had to be, as my girlfriend just dropped off some soup and Powerade from the store to me and headed to work. She's a deputy for the next town over's police department, so she just leaves and I'm back in bed, dog next to me perusing my choices on Netflix, when I hear our gate open. Now the dog hears it too. She's a cattle dog, so she's very protective over her turf and me, so she's growling. At first I think it's my brother and his friend going to soak in the hot tub. Then I get a text. It's my brother. He and his lady friend are headed to the store and asking if I want anything. I freeze. So if he's not here, who the fuck is outside my yard? I grab my rifle. It's not loaded, so I load it while the dog's making a racket. My windows open a smidge and I approach it. The way my windows are that they're windows. There's a ladder that leads to the yard on both windows and 2 grates that open. I shout out, "Who the fuck's there?" No answer, just giggling. So I say fuck this and dial 911. In the midst of doing this, the grate swings open and a stringy hair blonde chick starts coming down the ladder. She sees me, rifle in hand, and bangs on the window while I'm telling dispatch what's going on, and they tell me a unit's on the way. This chick's going on about zenith and vibrations, and the aliens told her and her best friend I have drugs. I tell her and her friend to get the fuck out. I hear the male yell cops, and her skinny ass books it. So I run upstairs, my dog hot on my heel. I open the back door and my dog runs out after them. Both of them hop over my yard to my neighbor's. I hear the cops coming into my yard. I let them know I have a gun and set it on the grass. I point to my neighbor's wall and one cop lifts himself over, but they've already escaped. I let them know what happened and they're pretty sure they know this particular duo. By this time my brother's home, so I fill him and his girlfriend in. Cops tell us to keep the windows and doors locked, and if they come back, to call them again. Now I'm back in my room, too fucking keyed up to sleep. Rifle in hand. Hopefully I don't see those fucking druggies again. At the time, I was a few months into undergrad in Austin, Texas, and had just become comfortable enough with myself to come out of the closet. There were no dating apps available, so to find dates I used Craigslist. Big mistake. I started chatting with a guy off Craigslist, Craig, and we hit it off and decided to set a time and place for a date to meet in person. His ad said he was 27, and I was 18 at the time. At first he was very insistent on meeting at his place, which I later found out was just a trailer. And it kind of made me suspicious, but in his pictures he was very good looking, had a nice smile, etc., so I decided to let it go. Eventually we agreed to get coffee before going to his place. So the day arrived and I went to get coffee and I was pretty excited. I had showed my roommate pictures of Craig and talked about how I was looking forward to meeting him. I showed up at the coffee shop and he was already there. He actually did look like his pictures, so that was a good start. We got coffee and ended up chatting for several hours before he asked whether I wanted to go back to his place. Luckily, my roommate called to check up on me, and it also happened that he was stranded because his car had broken down. So I told Craig that I would take my friend back home before heading over to his place. Well, by the time I picked up my friend, Craig was no longer answering his phone or texts or anything. When he finally answered, he accused me of making up some excuse so I wouldn't have to go back to his place with him, and basically was very angry and annoyed despite our great conversation earlier. I was a bit bummed, but basically didn't think of him again until years later when my old roommate sent me a link for a news article about Craig. Apparently, he had been running a sex trafficking ring using underage boys that he would lure through his good looks and promises. I can only imagine what would have happened to me if I had gone back to his trailer with him that day. Back in December of 2012, I received a notice from the manager of the grocery outlet I worked at that we were getting a new member of our overnight crew scheduled to be in the following night. The crew, who consisted of myself and several others, all worked together for quite some time, and we all grew into good friends. So, the next night it's myself and 2 others on schedule when the new guy comes in. I already knew his name to be Cole, so I immediately went up to introduce myself and all that jazz before showing him around and telling him exactly what to expect on any given night. Surprisingly, he seemed to be a quick learner. Not that this shit is complicated, but it can be a bit tricky at first. But he never asked any questions or made any comments, almost acting as if he either knew what he was being told or that he wasn't interested. Being the supervisor, I was pretty much the authority, but I never used it. Everyone was used to a loud atmosphere as we would play music and yell a lot. It helped keep us awake and somewhat energized. As I tried to break him in, Cole didn't seem interested, preferring to work alone and not take part in our antics. As time went on, his work began to falter. Soon, he began to slow down and disappear to the back of the store for a while to do whatever, then return an hour or so later, but I always figured he was being productive and left him alone. What did surprise me though was when Cole would use a box cutter. He wouldn't cut off the tape, but instead he would stab the boxes and rip them open. I told him to be careful, but he merely gave me a shrug each time. One day the manager called me and asked me to talk about how Cole's been doing at night. I told him about how he became slower with work and seemed much less interested, seemingly doing the bare minimum to get by. He suggested that I should talk to him, and I agreed. 3 nights later, it's just Brad and myself on the schedule. After doing the usual stuff for a while, it was finally break time. We decided to walk over to the gas station convenience store nearby and buy some stuff for our lunch break. As we got back, I noticed that the entrance door was left open. Shit, that's not good, I thought. Must have forgotten to close it, but Brad said that he did. That's odd. We head inside and continue working until lunch break. We're sitting in the break room eating and chatting when we both simultaneously heard something that sounded like one of the freights moving. It happened again shortly thereafter, so I got up to check it out while Brad stayed inside the break room. I got out to the sales floor and noticed that one of the freights had moved a few feet away from where I left it originally. Also, some merchandise had fallen off and was lying on the ground. I began to put the stuff back on the freight when I heard Brad yell my name. Completely used to yelling, I casually walked back towards the break room to meet up with Brad. He pointed towards the emergency exit and said that someone had just walked out, but the alarm didn't go off. I jogged up to it and peered outside and saw nothing. At first I thought this was a joke. I laughed it off and told him to stop fucking with me, but he insisted. I went out of the emergency door and walked around the store, but didn't see anybody. I came back in through the front entrance and met up with Brad once again near the break room. What did scare me, though, was when Brad and I walked up to the emergency exit, Brad suddenly turned around and saw somebody walking. He nudged me and I just turned around to barely see the person walk towards the freezer and around the corner, which was all the way on the opposite end of the back store area. I ran to catch up with whoever it was, but didn't see anyone when I turned the corner. The freezer was locked, so whoever it was couldn't have gotten inside unless they had a key, but only I have the key. Brad came up to me and asked me if I believed him now, and I said I did. Who could be in the store and how did they get in? I then thought of the left open entrance from earlier and the fact that the emergency exit door alarms were disabled. It must be someone who either works here and or is aware of our movements in the alarm system. We headed back to the sales floor to investigate some more. Nothing was knocked off of the shelves, nor was the freight moved this time. I walked up near the front entrance and peered out of a window towards the parking lot, but saw nobody. But then, as I turned towards the front entrance, I saw somebody walking from the parking lot to the back side of the store. This time, I recognized the person. It was Cole. What the fuck? He's not supposed to be working. I yelled out to Brad, who came up to me as I told him that Cole's outside and he's heading towards the back side of the store. He nods and runs off while I follow. We waited by the emergency exits for about 5 minutes, but Cole never entered. I yelled out to Brad to head to the sales floor while I stayed back there. I could hear him run off as I stayed by the emergency exit. Out of nowhere, I turned around and suddenly saw Cole standing about 20 feet from me with a box cutter in his hand. I watched on as he glared at me. How the fuck did he end up behind me? I asked him what the fuck he was doing there and that this wasn't funny. He didn't seem to pick up on that though. Finally, when he did move, it was to position the box cutter in an upwards cutting position like he was going to stab my chest or something, but he eventually lowered it down and spoke to me. "Tell the manager I quit." Cole then turned, put the box cutter in his pocket, then walked towards the opposite end once again towards the freezer and turned the corner, disappearing. I stood there in shock for about a minute when Brad came running back to me. He asked if I saw Cole and I told him I did, heading off towards the freezer. Brad asked what we should do. I told him what happened, but insisted we just let it go for now. I waited until the manager arrived a couple of hours later and told him that Cole had told me he quit, but didn't go into any detail. I decided not to tell the manager about what had happened, nor any other co-workers for that matter. I didn't want to escalate this any further than it had already. It wasn't until Brad said something that the police became involved, and I then learned after talking with the authorities that Cole has a mental health record, and I should have reported what happened and not kept it a secret, regardless of my reasoning. When I was 19 years old, I had hit a dating rut. Between college and work, I was unable to put much effort into meeting new people or forming new relationships. I'm a female, by the way. My best friend at the time had just recently married, and with no dating life for herself anymore, she decided that helping me find the right guy would be the next best thing. I honestly wasn't even that interested in dating at the time. I just wanted to finish my basics and transfer to a large university. But she insisted I give it a chance, and she asked if it was alright to give this guy she knows my phone number. I'm wary and refuse at first until she starts begging. She pleads about how handsome this guy is and how he's 25 and has a stable life. She tells me about the well-paying job he has, about the house he built himself, about the ranch and his horses he owns. She glorifies him as this sensitive, caring, attractive, put-together guy. But I know no one is that perfect. So I ask, "Alright, what's the catch?" She replies, "He only has one leg." Now that in and of itself is not a problem until she says, "He accidentally shot himself in the leg and it had to be amputated." I look at her like she's just said the dumbest thing I have ever heard in my life. I explain that I don't think I want to date someone who mishandles a gun so badly they shoot their own leg off. But after all her begging and pleading, I cave and me and him begin chatting. I can't quite remember his name, so let's just call him Steve. The first couple of days of us texting was pretty okay. He was charming, funny, and it was easy to keep a conversation going between us. He had a slight arrogant tone and bragged a bit, but I excused it. I mean, if I had my own house and a high-paying job at 25, I think I would be a little smug too. He had made a few comments that sent up a warning flag, like how when we discussed meeting in person, he talked about wanting to wait for a while before we meet, and that before we meet, he would like to see me in public. But like, me not seeing him in public. He wanted me to go to a public place where he could then observe me with me not realizing he's there. Now that's some creepy shit. I told myself I was looking too deep into it and to give this guy a chance. But on the third day, more specifically at night, he suddenly decided things weren't moving fast enough. He began asking inappropriate questions, like what my sexual experience was, what my deepest, darkest hidden kinks were, had I ever masturbated, etc. I expressed my discomfort with this due to us only knowing each other for 3 days. He backed off and apologized and began a guilt trip on me that, at the time, I didn't really notice. He said manipulative things like, "I didn't mean anything by it, I just want you to trust me," and "I don't want our relationship to be a normal relationship, I want us to be open with one another," and "I just want to be the only person that you trust your fears with." Another day and night of this, and I, very stupidly, told him one of the deepest, darkest kinks that I have never and will never tell anyone about. I won't even name what it is in this story. He immediately sympathizes with me and assures me that he feels the same while wanting me to go into further detail. I immediately feel regret and try to change the topic. He keeps trying to bring it up again, and I explain that I'm not comfortable and that I don't think I should have told him those things because it was too soon. I explained that I wanted to take it slow. He agrees and we change topics. We started talking about his home and his ranch, and I asked him to send pictures of his house because he built it himself. He immediately starts sending me photo after photo of his home and ranch and all of his horses. For a while it's no text, just pictures being sent one after the other. Picture of a house, of a yard, horse, huge erect dick, fence. I immediately interrupt him with "What the fuck?" He asks if I liked it, to which I reply with a big fat no. I try to explain how inappropriate that is and try to understand why he thought it was okay to send that when it had nothing to do with what we were talking about. He gets irritated and says, "Damn, just chill. Stop freaking out. It wasn't even my dick." Excuse me? It wasn't your dick? Then whose dick was it? I proceed to blow up and we get into a fight. I contact the friend who set us up and explained what has happened. She tells me that Steve has also contacted her and that he was calling me a bitch and saying that I was a psycho. Me and my friend agree to just ignore him and end the conversation. This completely infuriates him. He begins threatening not just me, but my friend too, saying he's going to kill us and our families and that we would be sorry and all that bullshit. We just ignored until he literally recites our fucking home addresses to us. We pay attention after that. Now, I never told him which city I lived in or anything like that. I asked my friend how exactly she knew him, and she said that she kind of lied and didn't really know him that well. She used to work in an FYE at the local mall, and apparently this psycho was a customer who stopped there, and one day she just randomly asked if he was single and if he might be interested in me. I proceed to lose my shit. She didn't even know the guy. The guy shouldn't even know our last names, and here he is, now telling us the names of our parents and our siblings and our telephone numbers. We immediately take screenshots of everything he's saying and inform him that if he doesn't stop, then we're involving the police. He, of course, continues with his threats. My friend's mom is the secretary of a lawyer, so after reporting Steve to the authorities and blocking him, we took the situation to my friend's mom, and she took care of it. I don't have the exact details, but we never heard from him again. Reading this might not seem too scary to you. Retelling it now makes it seem quite hilarious. But when a stranger is reciting your own address to you and threatening your well-being, it can be pretty dang terrifying. A few days later, I came to the realization that I should have known the dick pic wasn't a pic of his own dick because the guy in the picture has 2 legs. So, one-legged Steve who has pics of other dudes' dicks, let's not meet. I have a restraining order. We have an iMessage group chat going of about 7 friends and myself. One of our friends, Kay, is kind of the annoying little sister type and gets on all of our nerves, but we tolerate her. Kay sends us a screenshot of a conversation with her younger cousin, who is either a senior in high school or a freshman in college. He tells her that he is on Tumblr and that a photo of Kay showed up on his feed. He proceeded to reblog and show her. Kay is confused because the photo is a random selfie from her Instagram, which she rarely uses and has set to private. In addition, neither she nor any of the people in the group chat even use Tumblr. She asks her cousin for a link to the site. Upon skimming the website, we find, to our horror, that the Tumblr is brimming with photographs of all 5 girls in the group chat. Individual posts with personalized captions of photos taken from our respective Instagrams, most of which are private. The further back we viewed the page, the creepier it got, because it seemed like the page was targeting one particular girl in our group, Q. 90% of the photos the individual posted were just of Q, mostly taken from her Instagram. There were love poems dedicated to her, sentimental captions accompanying some photos such as Q and her loving parents, and even some photos that were obtained from her Facebook account, despite all settings being set to private. The owner of the Tumblr seems to be an adult male from a country different to where we live, who occasionally posted things that were more personal to him, such as a photo of an ice skating rink in his childhood neighborhood, or a YouTube link to a homemade footage from like 8 years ago that he helped produce. The owner of the account doesn't seem to be the same person as the owner of the Tumblr. Through my own investigation, the person does seem to be real, though the primary purpose of that site looked like a shrine of sorts dedicated to Q. There were in fact other posts, such as lyrics to random old songs by obscure artists which hinted at the owner's age. There were photos pulled from my own Instagram, such as a zoomed-in and cropped pic of my face taken from a group shot. The most horrifying part was one of the older photos he had posted. This photo was not just one of Q's pulled from her social media. It was a photograph of 2 real framed photos in the person's home of Q. The caption for that photo indicated that the stalker had been dedicated to her since 2012. 2012. We just came across this Tumblr here in 2017. Needless to say, we were all thoroughly stunned and frightened, and we have no idea what to do. Q proceeded to send an angry message to the owner via some link on their page, and just like that, the page was deleted. We have no more leads, although I've been doing my own research on trying to find out the identity of the person. I'm not even sure what we can do from here, seeing how we no longer have evidence except for screenshots of the site that we took, as well as a Wayback Archive link of the site. Any advice would be appreciated. This literally just happened to me, and now I'm sitting in my apartment, all the blinds drawn and the doors locked. I live in a city and I work 3rd shift, so needless to say I've seen some weird shit at night. Due to my schedule, even when I'm off, I'm up the whole night. That being said, I was in the military and I've worked in security forever, so even though I'm pretty skinny, 5'7" and a female, I rarely get nervous being out and about at night. Anywho, I live alone with no one to keep me company but my cat and my fur child, a 6-month-old lab boxer. Around 4 a.m., Pup went to the door and indicated he needed to go out. Now, him signaling that he needs to go pee is kind of a new thing, so I jumped at the chance to take him outside. So I bundled myself up, hooked the puppy up to the leash, and out we go. To get to the stretch of land where the dogs are allowed to use the restroom, you have to walk past one other apartment complex and up a hill. It's late, so it's dark, but the apartment parking lot, which runs alongside it, is well lit, so I've never felt nervous or that it was too dark. Pup starts to sniff around and I light up a cigarette and watched with what was probably a disproportionate sense of victory as my dog pees outside. Suddenly, Pup stops midstream. His entire body went still in a way I've only ever seen concerning squirrels. His ears perk up, his tail is straight up, and then slowly, his ears started to pin back, his tail quivered, and a low, angry-sounding growl I've never heard my pup make starts. At the same moment, I felt the hair on the back of my neck stand up. Some long-buried instinct flared up, and I became instantly wary. I turned and put my back to the brick of the nearest apartment building and scanned the parking lot. Nothing. Nobody out walking their dogs, no one out throwing trash away or walking to their car, no one on their balcony. Pup's growling started to get louder and louder, and he actually started to lower his head. At this point, I'd gone completely still, and my reaction to his discomfort was so severe that I'd fallen back on old habits and curled the palm of my hand to hide the cherry of my cigarette so it wasn't giving off as much light. This is pointless, by the way, as I was out in a seafoam green North Face and brown Uggs that stand out like a beacon in the darkness, never mind the fact that I was standing underneath a light. At this point, I had pretty much decided to nope the fuck out and head back to my apartment because I trust my dog's judgment of the situation. I started shuffling towards the walkway that would lead me back down to my entryway, hesitant to even turn my back to the area despite the fact I couldn't see anymore. To my surprise, Pop started following me without any complaints. Normally he would fight tooth and nail to avoid going back inside. I didn't want to turn my back to the lot, but I also didn't want to just stumble backwards down the hill. Finally, I decided fuck it, and just swung around and walked briskly back to my apartment. As I was going up the outside stairs, my dog paused at the top landing just before I reached it, staring behind me. I punched the code to get into my building before turning around, holding the door open, and standing at the top of the hill is a guy. No, I've never seen this guy before, but what the hell, I don't know everyone in the complex. But he was just standing there watching me from the path I just walked, and I had no idea where the hell he came from. Pup was still growling, so I moved back, pulling him inside. I made sure the door was shut and locked, then ran up 3 flights of stairs to my floor. I paused at the top where there was a big window, and the guy had moved further down the hill and was just standing there, watching me. I backed up and passed the fire door, but I still didn't feel safe even with it closed and me finally removed from the guy's sight. I ran back to my apartment and locked the door. I called my apartment's 24/7 helpline, but despite the fact that it's called a 24/7 helpline, no one was there. So, I'm eating cookies with a huge-ass Bowie knife, watching Rocko's Modern Life. I always watch cartoons when freaked out, and my poor pup probably still needs to pee. I have no idea if I'm ever going to take him out late at night again. I work at an outdoor mall in a great neighborhood. You'd assume that it's safe as hell to be here, but then again, you just can't be sure anymore. There are creepy people everywhere, and I just can't help shake the feeling that this isn't my last encounter with this man. I'm 19 years old, and I work at a kiosk that sells all kinds of wonky jewelry. It's usually teens, young adults, and occasionally some older adults that shop with us. Every once in a while, this man comes up to the kiosk, easily recognizable. Same leather jacket, crinkled corners of his eyes, one front tooth shorter than the other, same slouched way of walking. He's usually harmless, but oh my good God, the last few times he's come by have made me so uncomfortable. I greet every customer with, "Hey, can I help you find anything?" And most of them say they're just looking. He always smiles at me and says, "Just looking, darling." At first it was fine. I didn't care whatsoever. He seemed like a harmless 50 or so years old man. He always spent a very long time looking at the display and never bought anything. Most of the time I'm working the night shift. At the kiosk, while I'm surrounded by other shoppers and other kiosk workers, mine is kind of all by itself in between 2 empty ones in the back. The mall sales have been going downhill the last few years, and I'm usually left alone, minus the friendly security woman that stops and chats with me on her rounds. She comes by every 30 minutes or so, and she's one of the few friends I have at work. The only stores in my view are a Reebok and a Macy's. A few nights ago, I was sitting at my kiosk, bored out of my mind, and the security lady had already continued on her way. I had scrolled through Reddit already and was getting ready to open up Netflix and continue watching Terrace House when I hear footsteps coming up. I look up to see the creepy man staring at me, but not actually at the kiosk yet. I wave at him, and he gives a little smile, but one that sends chills down my spine. A customer walks up and I immediately jump at the chance to help them, trying to shake the creepy feeling I had. After I checked out the customer and written down the receipt, I glanced up to see the man still staring at me. Before I could say anything, he started walking over, taking my eye contact as permission to come join me. "Evening, darling," he said, doing an almost bow. "Good evening," I told him. He proceeded to do his usual checking the display, not buying anything movements. Instead of walking around the cart, he stayed by the register where I was, walked behind my chair to check the sides, but never went where he couldn't see me. Then he started asking questions, like we were longtime friends or something. "So, darling, do you have a boyfriend?" I kinda guffawed at that, because I'd been single for over a year now. I told him no, I didn't have a boyfriend, but there was a checkout girl I found pretty damn cute at my local grocery store. "I see," he said. "Do you have any plans after work?" he asked me. I was getting uneasy at this point, but I told him yes, I was going to a party. "You gonna hook up with any boys?" he asked. My jaw dropped. Whether or not I was hooking up with any boys was in no way any of his business, but I just told him no. He smiled a little and said, "Good. You're too pretty for them little boys anyways." He faced me again and came up to hug me. Until this point, I hadn't realized my heart rate increasing, and it only became apparent after I found it harder to breathe. Before he could actually do so, Linda, the security woman, walked up and glared at him. "Sir, if you're not going to be buying anything from this young woman, I would suggest you go loiter somewhere else." He stiffened at the sound of Linda's voice. She's a very intimidating woman, and he left. "You alright, honey?" she asked me. I shrugged. "He's always here," I told her. She shook her head. "Let me and Russ walk you to your car after work today, okay?" I nodded, relieved that she offered without me even having to ask. The rest of my shift was fine. I get through it and managed to make my bosses a bit of money. At 10 o'clock on the dot, Linda and her boyfriend Russ are at my kiosk. They wait for me to pack up my purse and then walk me to my little Prius. They wait for me to drive away as well. On my way to the party, I stop by a gas station to fill up the tank. As I'm waiting for it to fill, I glance over and see the man from the mall at the mini-mart. He's buying a pack of cigarettes, and he looks out the window and sees me. When he does, he smiles and waves. He holds up one finger, asking me to wait a minute. I don't. I yank out the fuel hose and jump in my car, booking it out of there. I take several detours before arriving 30 minutes late to the party. I had to make sure I would lose him before showing up there. It's been a few nights since that happened, and the only reason I'm submitting this now is because I'm actually working the morning shift, and I just saw him walk out of the Macy's across from me. Linda has someone biking around this half of the mall, so he won't come near me today. Back in 1989 to 1990, I worked for a large drugstore chain. I was about 19 years old and female. As I was a college student, I worked the closing shift, which ended usually at 9 p.m. After facing the shelves and counting out the cash drawers, I get out between 9:30 to 10 p.m. My home at college was about a 25-minute drive, so I would drive this rather desolate highway home. It's busier on the road during the day, but nearly no one on it at that hour. I was driving and saw police lights in my rearview mirror. Thinking back on it, I noticed something was wrong with the lights, but it wasn't enough to really register. I pulled over, but that little voice that keeps you safe was telling me to proceed with caution. I rolled down my window about 3 inches and waited. The cop approached me, and I was still racking my brain with what I could have done wrong, probably speeding. The cop walks up to my car, but kind of angles himself, so I had to really turn around in my seat to see him. He was mid-30s, clean-cut and wearing a uniform. He asked me to roll down my window further, and I did, another inch. Something about him just was wrong. So wrong. I couldn't put my finger on it, but when he tried to open my door, I knew it was wrong. I kept asking him why he pulled me over, and he said I needed to step out of the car. I told him I would, but he needed to call backup. He said I needed to listen to him. I told him again that I would, but I wanted someone else there and that I was uncomfortable. He started pulling my door handle harder. I don't know what that was going to accomplish, and he started beating on my window. I was scared for my life, especially because I didn't know if this was a real cop or an imposter. He started screaming for me to get out of the car now. He tried reaching through the window to grab me, any part of me. As he kept hitting my window, I'm screaming and crying, and had always been such a rule follower that I didn't know what to do. Finally, I gathered all my courage and gunned my car. Back then I drove an older Mustang, so that thing took off like crazy. I'm pretty sure I ran over his foot in the process. No regrets. Once I got back to my dorm, I told my boyfriend what happened. I was afraid to call the police because I was sure they were going to arrest me. He called them. They came out to the dorm and took a report. From what I remember, I wasn't the first young woman that this had happened to. And yes, it was a fake cop. I'm so grateful I listened to that little voice that told me not to roll my window down and told me to take off. It was only years later that I realized this guy almost certainly had to follow me from when I got off of work. How else would he know that the car had a young female occupant? From what I understand, they never caught him. I just hope he walks with a limp and rethinks targeting young women on empty highways. This happened to me when I was around 5 to 8 years old. It started when my mom's mother died. My grandma had a husband, my mom's stepfather, who she married later in life. My mom didn't know him well, but thought he was an okay guy. But over time, my grandparents' relationship soured. My grandma complained that they fought all the time. There wasn't any signs that the relationship was actually abusive, although in retrospect maybe it was. Anyway, my grandma died suddenly, and my mom and I went to stay with my step-grandfather for a while so we could sort through my grandma's stuff. She had hoarding tendencies, and help him with all the shit you have to take care of after death. But my mom started to notice some things didn't add up. My grandma had been healthy and active, and she just suddenly stopped breathing in her sleep. Okay, it happens, I guess. But why was my step-grandfather so cheerful? And why did he have an expensive vacation planned next month, booked before her death, with no ticket for my grandma, when they always vacationed together before? And in a house full of disorganized clutter, isn't it convenient that he had already had all the relevant insurance, will, legal documents, and information already gathered neatly in a folder, which my mother was prevented from looking at? Just lots of little things that made my mom wonder. It seemed like he had prepared for a death no one else saw coming. So she started asking questions, and that's when we started getting stomach aches. They happened regularly after meals and got worse towards the end of each day. Previously, my mom and step-grandfather had alternated cooking, but he started insisting that he'd take care of all the cooking, to the point where he was aggressive about it. Being so young, my memory of all this is quite foggy, a mixture of my true memories and what my mom has told me. But I do have some clear memories, and one is this. My mom sat me down at the table, then walked over to the counter where he was finishing the meal, unaware of her approaching. When she reached out to grab a finished dish and set it on the table, He noticed at the last minute and screamed at her, "Hey, leave that alone! I've got it!" and snatched it away from her. She watched him carefully after that and noticed that he always seemed to fiddle with two of the dishes right before serving them, always to me and my mother. She was getting scared now, so early one morning she snuck a look at that folder of insurance and legal documents I mentioned earlier. The details are too personal to go into, but suffice it to what she saw there convinced her. She believes, and I do too, that my step-grandfather, tired of being married to someone he hated and not wanting to lose his assets in a divorce, smothered my grandmother to death in her sleep. When we came around and started asking questions, he poisoned us, either to kill us to cover up the murder or to make us sick enough that we'd want to go home to recover. I think the latter is more likely, but I was a small kid and I was getting very sick, and it would have been easy to overdose me even if he didn't intend to. My mom woke me and we immediately fled. The stomach ache stopped. A few weeks later, we broke the lease on our apartment and moved somewhere he would never find us, just in case. We never spoke to him again. I asked my mom years later why she didn't go to the police, and she said she didn't know. She was still reeling from the death of her mother and was panicked, and did what felt right at the time. My mother was 13, and this would have been mid to late 1960s. She's the second oldest of 7 children. Her drunk wife-beating dad had just left them all and promptly remarried and started a new family within months. Thus, my grandmother and my older aunt, 15 years old, were both working to make ends meet for such a huge family, and my mom was left to babysit all the younger kids on her own almost every night of the week. They are in the main bedroom playing games and talking. One bed is pushed against the wall at almost the same level as a large window. This was a very rural area, and the only thing outside that side of the house was a patch of woods with a cow field on the other side, so they often left the blinds open. Mom is sitting on the bed with her siblings, not really paying attention to the darkness outside. At one point, my Uncle Robbie, about 5 at the time, goes to the bathroom, and when he was walking back into the room is when he starts screaming at the top of his lungs, pointing over my mother's shoulder at the window. No words, just a long scream before taking a breath and screaming again. Mom looks over, and less than the width of a bed from her, a guy is against the glass and grinning like only a true nutjob can. She said it looked like it would hurt to smile that hard. He had one hand against the window and the other in his pants with a jerking motion. Yeah, really classy. Mom wasn't having any of it. She told her next oldest sister to get the baby out of the crib and to get against the door as she slid off the bed, never breaking eye contact with him as she bent over to the floor and pulled the shotgun out from under the bed. The guy didn't seem to understand what he was seeing at first and still stood there, so she fired a slug right into the wall under the window. The guy lit out of there, tripping over himself. She called Granny at work, and Granny came home. After that event, she'd have an elderly couple from down the street stay with them till they finally moved years later. The next day, they could see it actually puckered the wall outward on the outside of the house. She was close to actually shooting him right through that crappy old house's walls. Now, my mother ended up becoming a military officer for obvious reasons. Now, the only good thing my grandfather did was make sure his kids over the age of 8 knew how to work a gun against bad men without being afraid of it. And it may have just saved all of their lives. Found out was just a trailer, and it kind of made me suspicious, but in his pictures he was very good looking, had a nice smile, etc., so I decided to let it go. Eventually we agreed to get coffee before going to his place. So the day arrived and I went to get coffee, and I was pretty excited. I had showed my roommate pictures of Craig, and talked about how I was looking forward to meeting him. I showed up at the coffee shop and he was already there. He actually did look like his pictures, so that was a good start. We got coffee and ended up chatting for several hours before he asked whether I wanted to go back to his place. Luckily, my roommate called to check up on me, and it also happened that he was stranded because his car had broken down. So I told Craig that I would take my friend back home before heading over to his place. Well, by the time I live in the basement of a 2-story house. My brother and I rent. He is the upper floor, and my girlfriend and I live on the lower floor. He's entertaining a lady friend this evening, and I'm in my room trying not to hack up a lung. I have that flu going around, so I've been curled up under my comforter, sleeping on and off and watching Netflix. Around 8, it had to be, as my girlfriend just dropped off some soup and Powerade from the store to me and headed to work. She's a deputy for the next town over's police department, so she just leaves and I'm back in bed, dog next to me perusing my choices on Netflix, when I hear our gate open. Now the dog hears it too. She's a cattle dog, so she's very protective over her turf and me, so she's growling. At first I think it's my brother and his friend going to soak in the hot tub. Then I get a text. It's my brother. He and his lady friend are headed to the store and asking if I want anything. I freeze. So if he's not here, who the fuck is outside my yard? I grab my rifle. It's not loaded, so I load it while the dog's making a racket. My windows open a smidge and I approach it. The way my windows are that they're windows. There's a ladder that leads to the yard on both windows and 2 grates that open. I shout out, "Who the fuck's there?" No answer, just giggling. So I say fuck this and dial 911. In the midst of doing this, the grate swings open and a stringy hair blonde chick starts coming down the ladder. She sees me, rifle in hand, and bangs on the window while I'm telling dispatch what's going on, and they tell me a unit's on the way. This chick's going on about zenith and vibrations, and the aliens told her and her best friend I have drugs. I tell her and her friend to get the fuck out. I hear the male yell cops, and her skinny ass books it. So I run upstairs, my dog hot on my heel. I open the back door and my dog runs out after them. Both of them hop over my yard to my neighbor's. I hear the cops coming into my yard. I let them know I have a gun and set it on the grass. I point to my neighbor's wall and one cop lifts himself over, but they've already escaped. I let them know what happened and they're pretty sure they know this particular duo. By this time my brother's home, so I fill him and his girlfriend in. Cops tell us to keep the windows and doors locked, and if they come back, to call them again. Now I'm back in my room, too fucking keyed up to sleep. Rifle in hand. Hopefully I don't see those fucking druggies again. At the time, I was a few months into undergrad in Austin, Texas, and had just become comfortable enough with myself to come out of the closet. There were no dating apps available, so to find dates I used Craigslist. Big mistake. I started chatting with a guy off Craigslist, Craig, and we hit it off and decided to set a time and place for a date to meet in person. His ad said he was 27, and I was 18 at the time. At first he was very insistent on meeting at his place, which I later